Tuvalu, a small Pacific island nation with a population of just 11,000 people, faces an existential challenge. With a mean elevation of less than 10 feet and its highest point being less than 5 meters or 15 feet above sea level, rising tides and climate change threaten to inundate much of Tuvalu by 2050. But it's not giving up. Instead, it's pioneering a bold legal and diplomatic strategy to redefine what it means to be a state. What exactly is Tuvalu doing, and how does this connect to ideas of sovereignty, justice, and the tragedy of the commons? Hey everyone, I'm Noah Zerbe. I'm a professor of global politics at California State Polytechnic University, Humboldt. Welcome to Global Insights, where we analyze pressing international issues through the lens of international relations and political economy. Over the past 30 years, local sea levels in Tuvalu have risen by more than 15 centimeters, 1.5 times the global average. NASA projects that by 2050, daily tides will flood half of Funafuti, the nation's main atoll. Beyond the physical threats, rising sea levels have salinated groundwater, destroyed crops, and forced reliance on imported foods and rainwater collection. For a country with deep cultural and spiritual ties to the land, the stakes couldn't be higher. So, how does a sinking nation stay afloat, politically, economically, and legally? It begins with a foundational question in international relations. What defines a state? As codified in the Montevideo Convention of 1933, international law defines a state based on 3 criteria: a permanent population, a defined physical territory, and a government capable of entering into relations with other states. But what happens if a state's territory disappears underwater? Tuvalu's leaders are challenging this traditional definition of statehood, seeking to preserve its statehood even if its land disappears under rising tides. They argue that statehood is more than just about land, it's about shared identity, governance, and international recognition. Their argument is rooted in a constructivist approach to international law, which maintains that international rules and norms are not fixed, but rather can evolve when countries collectively agree to adapt them. By persuading other countries to recognize their continued existence, Tuvalu hopes to create a new international norm that ensures its sovereignty even without physical territory. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, often referred to as UNCLOS, a country's territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles or 22.2 kilometers from its baseline, which is usually the low water line along the coast. Within this area, a state exercises sovereignty into the waters, airspace, and seabed. Foreign shipping is allowed innocent passage, meaning they can legally transit the area without hindrance as long as their passage is not prejudicial to the peace, good order, or security of the coastal state, which is to say they can't engage in military exercises or illegal fishing in the area. International law also provides countries an exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, extending up to 200 nautical miles or 370 kilometers from the baseline of the coastal nation. Within this area, the coastal state does not have sovereignty, but instead maintains sovereignty rights for the purpose of exploring, exploiting, conserving, and managing natural resources. Other countries have freedom of navigation, overflight, and other limited rights within the EEZ, provided their activities comply with international law. But both a country's territorial waters and its exclusive economic zone is based on its physical territory, its baseline. And so what happens when that baseline is shrinking or disappearing altogether? That's Tuvalu's primary concern. Its current legal strategy focuses on securing international recognition of its sovereignty and maritime boundaries as permanent, regardless of its physical landmass. This would protect Tuvalu's exclusive economic zone, a vast ocean area rich in tuna, which generates more than $30 million a year for the country, which has a per capita gross domestic product of less than $5,500. In 2023, Tuvalu revised its constitution to enshrine perpetual statehood and recorded its maritime coordinates as a legal anchor. Its diplomats have pushed for bilateral agreements with countries like Australia and Taiwan to recognize these boundaries, but they face challenges. Major fishing nations have refused to sign on, and a global consensus remains elusive. But this isn't just Tuvalu's fight, it's a test case for global governance in the face of climate change. At the heart of the issue is whether international law can adapt to unprecedented environmental challenges. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea does not account for land loss due to climate change. Tuvalu and its allies in the Small Island Developing States group are pushing the United Nations to adopt a resolution to recognize permanent maritime boundaries despite rising seas, a move that could set precedent for other developing countries. But this fight isn't just about legal definitions or economic survival. For the people of Tuvalu, it's also about preserving their culture, heritage, and identity. Migration, an option for many through a treaty with Australia, raises difficult questions. Can a country survive when its people are scattered? What happens to cultural traditions that are tied to the land? Remember that in international relations, a nation is usually understood as a group of people with a shared sense of identity, normally rooted in characteristics like a common language, culture, history, or ethnicity. Unlike a state, which is a political and legal entity, a nation is primarily a socio-cultural concept. A nation can exist without statehood, think of the Kurds or historically at least the Palestinians, or it can coincide with a state, think of France or Japan. But the idea of nationhood is deeply tied to collective identity and shared values, which often transcend the physical borders of the state. In the words of Benedict Anderson, a nation is an imagined community. In light of the threat posed by rising sea levels, Tuvalu's exploring a groundbreaking concept, that of digital nationhood. This involves creating a digital replica of their country, its islands, culture, history, and so on, in an online world, hoping to ensure its continued existence even if its physical islands disappear. It's working with major tech firms like Meta to map the islands and their cultural landmarks, and to archive traditional practices, songs, dances, and oral histories. And it's leveraging blockchain technology to digitize and store important governmental documents like birth records, property titles, and legal texts to ensure that these records remain tamper-proof and accessible even if the physical infrastructure is lost. Much like its legal challenges to expand the concept of sovereignty, Tuvalu's digital statehood initiative pushes the boundaries of the idea of nationhood. It's raising questions about the responsibilities of states and global institutions towards nations at risk of physical erasure. Tuvalu's fight is more than just the story of one small island nation. It's a cautionary tale about the limits of global governance and the unequal impacts of climate change. At its core, this is an example of the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons is a concept introduced by Garrett Hardin in 1968 to describe how individuals acting in their own self-interest overuse and degrade shared resources, leading to harm for everyone. The global atmosphere is a prime example. Countries burn fossil fuels and emit greenhouse gases to power their economies, each reaping the benefits of industrialization. But the costs, rising seas, extreme weather, and disappearing lands, are borne disproportionately by the poorest and most vulnerable peoples worldwide. For Tuvalu, global inaction is devastating. Despite contributing almost nothing to global greenhouse gas emissions, its people are among the first to face existential threats from rising sea levels. This stark inequality highlights the need for international solidarity and stronger climate governance. But there's a deeper lesson here as well. The tragedy of the commons is not inevitable. It's a failure of collective action, and that means that it can be solved. Tuvalu's legal and digital strategies challenge the world to take responsibility for not only mitigating emissions, but also for adapting international law to address unprecedented challenges like disappearing states. But what do you think about Tuvalu's strategy? Can international law adapt fast enough, or is this just the beginning of broader challenges for the global community? And do major polluters like the United States and China have any obligation to support countries like Tuvalu? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to catch future explainers as they're released. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.